Imagine, like, actually treating the US dollar like a living, breathing person, complete with its own personality quirks and, really bad days.
Right, or imagine taking the exact mathematical coordinates of the solar system and, well, using them to predict a sudden crash in the price of Bitcoin.
It is so wild to think about. Welcome back, learner, to another deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a fascinating, and I mean highly specific astrological forecast.
We really are, and this covers the week of April 13th through the 19th, 2026.
Yeah, and the source material today is a Turkish blog. It's called Astrology, written by Gay Harasho. And, I just have to set the stage for you immediately.
Absolutely,
Because
because
you're picturing like a standard newspaper horoscope telling you to be open to new friendships this week. Just throw that image completely out the window.
yeah, do not expect that at all.
Uh-huh.
What we are looking at is a highly intricate, mathematically driven framework.
Right.
The author utilizes this rigid numerical system to forecast a staggering array of events. I mean, spanning from micro-level personal frustrations all the way to global politics.
And tectonic plate shifts. And like you mentioned, the volatile fluctuations of cryptocurrency markets.
Exactly. But before we get into how a planet millions of miles away supposedly triggers a geopolitical treaty, we really need to lay down a quick foundation for you.
For sure. Ground rules are important here.
Right, because this deep dive will explore some incredibly specific and, frankly, politically sensitive predictions involving real-world leaders, real nations, and current conflicts.
Yes, and we need to be crystal clear on this. We are neutrally reporting the exact viewpoints and the methodologies of the source material.
Purely to understand how this author attempts to decode the world through this unique mathematical lens.
Exactly. We are not endorsing these geopolitical claims. We are definitely not taking any political sides, left or right. We are simply examining the architecture of this specific predictive system.
Well said. So how about we actually unpack that architecture? Let's do it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack this. To understand what this blog claims is going to happen in, mid-April 2026, we first have to understand the engine driving the entire thing.
Right, the core mechanic.
Yeah, and the author relies on a scoring system called a katsaya, which translates to a coefficient.
A literal mathematical coefficient.
Yes. And right away, the text makes this crucial distinction between what it calls natal planets and astrological houses.
This is where it gets interesting. So the author defines natal planets, which are the positions of the planets at the exact moment you were physically born, as the symbols of your inherent behaviors.
Like your internal psychology.
Right. But the astrological houses, those represent the external world. They symbolize the possibilities, the environment, and the actual events that'll happen to you.
Regardless of your internal state.
Exactly. It's what the universe throws at you, basically.
I found this distinction really helpful because, well, it operates almost exactly like a role-playing video game.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. Right. Like, think of your birth chart as your base character stats.
Yeah.
You've got your baseline strength, your baseline intelligence. You carry those with you everywhere.
Yeah, they don't change.
But the astrological houses, combined with the daily movements of the planets, they act as temporary buffs or debuffs to your score.
And what's fascinating here is that if you take that video game logic a step further, the author actually instructs the reader on how to calculate these buffs and debuffs in real time.
You actually have to do the math.
You do. You don't just passively look at where a planet is in the sky today. The system assigns a daily transit coefficient, like a literal numerical value, to a planet's current movement.
Okay.
You then take that number and you physically add it to or subtract it from your personal natal planetary coefficients.
So you're constantly crunching the numbers to find your real-time score against the universe's current pressure.
Exactly. You're tracking your life stats.
And the blog actually maps out the house scores for this specific week we're looking at. For the week of April 13th, it notes that the house corresponding to Capricorn has the highest coefficient.
Right, so a major buff.
Yeah. So if your life right now involves navigating that specific house, you've got a massive multiplier on your stats. But on the flip side, the house for Leo has the lowest coefficient.
Which means maximum environmental friction for anyone operating in that space. It's a heavy debuff.
It really turns the entire human experience into a dynamic mathematical grid.
It does. And once you grasp that you are constantly moving through a field of shifting numerical pressure, you can start applying that same baseline logic to the timeline of global events the author predicts.
Learner, I want you to think about the worst, most frustrating day you had last week. In this system, you didn't just, have bad luck or poor sleep, you literally walked right into a mathematical debuff.
A statistical disadvantage.
Yeah. And that concept of personal friction, it scales up to a global level. Which brings us to the first major chronological spike of the week, April 15th.
Ah, yes. The source labels this a quote-unquote super day with an exclamation point.
Super day for both the moon and Mercury.
Right, the math really peaks here. On April 15th, the moon, which is moving through Pisces, and Mercury, moving through Aries, both hit a powerful +5 coefficient.
And a +5 is huge, right?
In the system, yes. It treats a +5 as an incredibly high-pressure environment. It's a massive surge.
I want to look at how the author interprets that +5 pressure specifically on Mercury. Because in astrology, Mercury is the planet that governs communication, information, data, and, the exchange of ideas.
Right, the flow of intel.
So the source predicts that because of this intense overarching pressure on the realm of information, hackers and spies are highly likely to be caught on this specific day.
The logic there implies that the environmental friction around secret data simply becomes too high. Things just can't remain hidden under a +5.
It just bubbles to the surface.
Exactly. But the system doesn't just stop at broad concepts like cybersecurity. It zooms in and applies these exact same planetary coefficients to entire nations.
Yeah, through a practice known as mundane astrology. And I have to admit, I had to read this section a few times.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
I mean, how does a country have a birth chart? Do you use the day the borders were drawn or like the day a constitution was signed? How does that work?
Well, in mundane astrology, you typically use the foundational moment of the current iteration of the state.
Okay.
So that could be a declaration of independence or the ratification of a governing document. And the source uses this methodology to predict that the moon in Pisces on the 15th will negatively impact the national security of Iraq.
Right, because according to this blog's calculations, Iraq's quote-unquote natal chart features a sun in Cancer and a Mars in Aries.
Right.
So when you cross-reference those base stats with that +5 moon in Pisces, the resulting math produces a dangerously low coefficient for the nation.
The text literally treats nations as interacting data sets. And it extends that exact same mathematical treatment to the specific leaders running those nations.
The politicians themselves?
Yeah. It forecasts, quote, Mercurian actions from global leaders who happen to be Geminis, since Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini.
And it specifically names U.S. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping here.
Right.
Noting that they will be taking these Mercurian actions, which specifically means making agreements and signing contracts.
Deals, basically.
Yeah. But at the exact same time, it issues a really stark warning to Turkish President Erdogan.
Based on his personal chart.
Exactly. The source calculates Erdogan's natal chart, which is a sun in Pisces and a Mars in Sagittarius, and concludes he has a very low coefficient against this +5 Mercury transit.
So a major debuff for him on that day.
Yes, and the text explicitly warns him to be very careful of Trump on this day.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. This raises such a massive philosophical question.
Oh, completely.
How does a rigid numerical system account for human agency? I mean, is the author implying that complex international treaties and delicate geopolitical maneuverings are just
the inevitable result of Mercury hitting a +5 on a spreadsheet?
Exactly. Are world leaders just acting on the math?
That is the core tension of this entire methodology, isn't it? The system operates on the premise that what we perceive as, political maneuvering or strategic choices, they're actually just predictable reactions to these mathematical planetary pressures.
Right. In this framework, the free will of a president or a prime minister is fundamentally directed, or at the very least, heavily constrained by the coefficient of the day.
It literally treats human history and geopolitics like a giant overlapping algorithm.
It's wild.
If you apply a +5 pressure to a leader with a low base stat, the resulting friction doesn't just make them feel a little stressed out. It manifests as a tangible political crisis or a sudden disadvantage in a negotiation.
And learner, this mathematical pressure doesn't recognize the difference between human boundaries and physical ones.
Oh, right. The physical world.
Yeah, if a planetary coefficient can strain a geopolitical relationship, the source argues it can also strain the literal crust of the Earth.
Which takes us from political shakeups to literal ones. Earthquakes.
Right, because the author attempts to predict physical geographical events using a technique called astrocartography. Let's look at the dates, April 10th and 13th.
Okay.
The text flags April 10th as an earthquake intersection point. It calculates this by averaging out the planetary pressure from April 7th through the 13th.
Predicting a high probability of severe quakes, violence, and terror.
Yes. Then it points to April 13th as a direct earthquake point, warning this is particularly dangerous for areas with weak fault lines.
But how does a planet actually cause an earthquake in this system? The author explains the math behind it, and honestly, it's a fascinating leap of logic.
It really is. They calculate the earthquake coefficient by summing up the coefficients of Scorpio.
Right, because in astrological symbolism, Scorpio is the sign that rules the underground.
Yeah.
The hidden depths, subterranean forces, all of that.
Exactly. By taking the numerical value of planets interacting with Scorpio, the author quantifies the pressure on the literal underground.
So intense mathematical pressure on the concept of the underground equals intense physical pressure on tectonic plates.
That's the logic, yeah.
But the system doesn't just say, hey, expect earthquakes globally. It uses that astrocartography to map this risk. Can you explain how you project a planetary score onto a literal map of the Earth?
Sure. So astrocartography basically draws lines on a globe. These lines represent where specific planets were rising, setting, or directly overhead at any given moment.
Okay, kind of like a shadow.
Precisely. The author takes the lines where Venus and Pluto are receiving negative geometric angles, specifically from the Sun and Uranus, and overlays those shadow lines onto the physical map of the world.
And where those lines cross fault systems.
You have your localized threat matrix.
And the resulting list of locations is deeply unsettling in its granularity. I mean, the text lists massive regions, right? Australia, Russia, America, Iran, Syria.
Huge land masses.
But when it maps the planetary lines over Turkey, it lists specific, highly localized areas. It names Amadra and Bartin, which, learner, these are relatively small coastal towns on the Black Sea.
Right.
And lists them right alongside major cities like Adana and Hatay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is essentially claiming that the mathematical angle between Venus and Pluto, which are millions of miles away in space, casts a specific shadow of risk over a small coastal town.
Placing a tiny town on the exact same planetary threat level as an entire continent.
Yes. It overlaps temporal risk, meaning the specific dates of the 10th and 13th, with this incredibly localized spatial risk.
It's just a staggering escalation of scale. We've gone from calculating the friction of our personal bad days to global hacker crackdowns to treaties between world leaders.
And now to the literal fault lines cracking under the combined math of Scorpio and Pluto.
But, and this is crazy, all of these individual pressure points, the diplomacy on the 15th, the seismic tension on the 13th, they're essentially just warm-ups.
Oh, yeah. The source material builds to a massive climax on April 18th.
Let's talk about the 18th.
So April 18th is flagged as the absolute most intense day of the entire week, and it is entirely driven by the planet Pluto, which reaches a massive +6 coefficient.
We really need to define Pluto's role here for anyone who doesn't know, because in astrology, that is not a gentle, subtle energy at all.
Quite the opposite. Pluto is associated with total transformation, destruction, power struggles, and the uprooting of deep systemic foundations.
It's a heavy hitter.
It is. A +6 coefficient represents an extreme, overwhelming surge of that specific destructive energy.
And the source issues a severe warning for anyone, or any entity really, with a low natal coefficient in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius.
The fixed signs.
Right. The text states that if you fall into those categories, you are standing directly in the path of Pluto's destructive face.
Not a good place to be.
No. However, it also notes that entities with high Mars coefficients, specifically in Aries or Libra, can actually weaponize this massive Pluto energy. They can use it to their advantage against the weaker signs.
And, true to the methodology of the blog, the author immediately scales this personal power dynamic right back up to the global stage. They offer a geopolitical example of this Pluto clash.
Let's see, yeah.
The text calculates that Israel has a natal sun in Taurus and a Mars in Leo.
Meaning it falls squarely into that vulnerable, low-coefficient group for this specific day.
Precisely. Therefore, the source predicts Israel could receive highly negative effects from entities with strong Mars placements.
Like who?
Well, it specifically names NATO, assigning it a natal Mars in Aries, and Turkey, assigning it a natal Mars in Libra.
Wow. It frames international relations entirely as an elemental battle of planetary math. You have the aggressive Aries and Libra energy overpowering the stubborn Taurus and Leo energy.
All catalyzed by the specific pressure of a +6 Pluto.
It reads like a Shakespearean drama, but it's literally written in spreadsheet formulas.
It really
Yeah.
does. And that profound +6 Pluto energy, it bleeds heavily into the other massive chaotic system the text attempts to predict, the global financial markets.
Oh, the finance stuff. This is my favorite part.
The author provides an entire coefficient breakdown for commodities and currencies, pointing back to April 15th as a major pivot point for the economy.
Yes, the pressure cooker of this week completely reshapes the markets. For April 15th, the prediction is a surge. Gold, silver, Brent crude oil, Bitcoin, and Ethereum are all forecasted to rise.
While the BIS T100, which is the Istanbul Stock Exchange, is predicted to drop.
But learner, the truly captivating part is how the author arrives at these financial predictions. They don't use economic indicators. They don't look at interest rates.
No.
They assign literal birth dates to currencies and markets.
Right. To calculate the astrological pressure on a barrel of oil or a digital token, you have to give it a natal chart.
Which is just mind-blowing.
It is. The author calculates the US dollar using a natal Venus in Cancer. The Turkish lira is given a natal Venus in Scorpio. The euro is calculated using its physical circulation date, which is January 1st, 2002.
And the stock exchange.
The Istanbul Stock Exchange is treated as being born on April 5th, 2013, which gives it a Sun, Mars, and Venus all clumped together in Aries.
I really want you to pause and visualize this, learner. We are talking about treating a decentralized artificial economic construct like a living, breathing entity.
It's anthropomorphism on a massive scale.
Exactly. The idea that the US dollar has a Venus in Cancer implies that a literal piece of paper values things or behaves based on the emotional protective traits of the Cancer zodiac sign.
But the absolute wildest application of this logic is Bitcoin.
Oh, let's talk about Bitcoin.
The author gives Bitcoin the birth date of January 3rd, 2009.
Which is the exact date the Genesis block, the very first block of Bitcoin data, was mined by Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yep. And by using that specific launch date, the system calculates that Bitcoin has a natal Sun and Mars in Capricorn, which is ruled by the planet Saturn.
Right.
It also calculates a natal Venus in Pisces, which is ruled by the planet Neptune.
Let's break down why that combination is so incredibly fitting, even from just a purely thematic standpoint. What do Saturn and Neptune actually represent in this system?
So Saturn is the planet of strict rules, boundaries, structure, and time. It represents immutable laws. You can't argue with Saturn.
And Neptune.
Neptune, on the other hand, is the planet of illusion, dreams, intangibility, and things that dissolve boundaries. It's the fog.
Think about what Bitcoin actually is. It is a completely intangible digital illusion that is pure Neptune energy. It exists nowhere physically.
Right.
Yet it is entirely governed by a strict, immutable, cryptographic ledger of rules and boundaries, which is pure Saturn energy.
It is a profound thematic coincidence. The author implies that the blockchain itself, which is just millions of lines of code distributed across a network of computers, is somehow subject to the gravitational and mathematical pull of the solar system.
Simply because someone pressed launch on a specific day in 2009.
Exactly.
This raises a massive question about human psychology for me, because the financial markets are arguably the most complex, unpredictable, and chaotic human systems on Earth.
Oh, absolutely. They're terrifyingly chaotic.
They are driven by millions of irrational micro-decisions made out of fear or greed every single second.
And by giving Bitcoin or the euro a natal chart, the author is basically applying a biological human life cycle to all that chaos.
It's a coping mechanism.
In a way, yeah. If a digital currency has a birth chart, it has a personality. And if it has a personality, its behaviors can be modeled, anticipated, and understood.
We are trying to tame the terrifying randomness of global finance by, projecting the stars onto it. We are desperate to give the chaos a pulse so we can measure it.
It forces the digital wilderness into a structured, readable narrative.
And that structural narrative really brings us to the end of our journey through this intensely mathematical week in April 2026.
It's been quite the ride.
When you pull back and look at the sheer scale of the Astrology source material, it is genuinely staggering.
We examine the mechanical foundation of the Katsaya system, where daily planetary transit scores are added and subtracted to base stats to calculate personal friction.
And then we looked at how a +5 Mercury transit on April 15th was forecasted to expose hackers and drive international treaties between Gemini leaders, which completely framed geopolitics as an algorithmic reaction.
We explored the terrifying granularity of astrocartography, too, where the symbolic weight of Scorpio mathematically translated into localized earthquake warnings for small Turkish towns on April 10th and 13th.
And finally, we unpack that massive +6 Pluto climax on April 18th, and the mind-bending concept of assigning biological birth charts to digital code to predict the rise of crypto.
The meticulous assignment of birth charts to abstract concepts like Bitcoin or the Istanbul Stock Exchange leaves us with a really critical question to consider.
I'm ready for it.
If an artificial human-made system, like a digital currency, supposedly has a fate written in the stars based purely on the day its code was launched, what does that reveal about us?
Oh, wow.
Does the math of the solar system actually shape the financial market? Or does our deep psychological desire for order and predictability shape our financial actions?
That's a real question.
Next time you check your retirement account on your phone or read a headline about an international treaty, ask yourself, are you watching the random chaos of human free will? Or are you just watching the coefficients play out?
That definitely makes you look at the unseen algorithms driving your daily life a little differently. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, learner. Keep questioning the data around you, keep looking for the hidden patterns, and we will catch you next time.